Okuma, Pefigu, Dosa, Lehitu, Roba. Praise Jack Skellington, hail the pumpkin. This is a video game Vision Quest. Doing a follow-up from my previous Halloween video about chaos magic and Halloween. I talked a little bit about jack-o'-lanterns in the previous video. About how I basically always thought of it as a form of golem creation or spirit servitor creation or epicor creation. Carving into the pumpkin, and whatever face emerges from it is the personality of the spirit who fights vampires and ghouls and ghosts and teenagers and fairies and aliens and what have you, getting smashed upon the pavements so that our more breakable things will not, protecting us from being on the other side. That's pretty much how I always thought of it as a kid. That's always been the nature of that Halloween tradition to me. That little story you tell yourself. When I was doing the last video, I came across this, another very interesting interpretation of what jack-o'-lanterns are. This is by a guy named Gypsy Lantern. This is from the Halloween Chaos Magic Threaded Barbalith, which the previous video was about. Tonight I'm going for the non-ancestral spirit stuff. On Halloween, I make a pumpkin lantern temporary spirit house. The local spirits walk abroad where they will tonight, so I honor that by preparing a pumpkin lantern, carved out and filled with rum, smokes, and candy. A place for the spirits to drop in, have a drink, and sometimes to eat as they do the rounds. Magically, it's a way of making good with the local spirits, both the dead and nature spirits, fairies, land wights, whatever walks on Halloween. Introduce myself, make sure they know who I am and know me as someone that raises a glass to them on their day. Always good to be in good standing with local spirits of the area where you will be operating over the coming year. Pumpkin House is a good way of making those nods without it being a big deal. I thought this was really cool. Instead of creating new spirits, the pumpkins are there waiting for other spirits to come inside and animate it. Carving through the pumpkin itself, through the flame. Why isn't all candle magic called fire magic? But yeah, I thought that was a really cool interpretation of pumpkins that I hadn't thought of before. Jack-o'-lanterns, I mean. It got me searching. And this is definitely not me trying to pretend to be an expert on any kind of history. I just was inspired to do a quick Wikipedia check after reading that interesting post. That interesting magic spell, really. Carving a pumpkin for the purposes of housing a spirit is definitely a magic spell, definitely a magical act, which is what the previous video and this video are all about. It's about making magic out of Halloween. Now, originally these traditions can be tied back to really old traditions of hearth fires, central fires for the communities that people would take a piece of back to their homes with them. Whether it's community strength or worshiping old gods. A very cool tradition. What was really interesting was finding how much of the jack-o'-lantern myth is connected to the myth of the Will-o'-the-Wisps. That was very surprising to me. People who play Dungeons & Dragons know who the Will-o'-the-Wisps are, but there's different versions of them all around the world. They're usually fairy-related. Basically, fairies who've transformed into lights and are trying to lead you off into the middle of nowhere. Jack-o'-lantern is basically another name for will-o'-the-wisp, also swamp gas. But yeah, the will-o'-the-wisp would lead people off the roads into the dark, and so there's all this mythology around it. Usually shape-changing fairies, sometimes other things though. They're definitely shape-changing fairies in Japan. In Mexico, they're shape-shifting witches, which I like. Also noted for marking hidden treasures. Also true some places in Europe. It's interesting how much universal truth there is to these, or universal cohesion there is amongst these myths. Shape-changing fairies, locations of treasures. Or there's this one in South America where the lights are actually the eyes of a mysterious fiery serpent. I like that one a lot. One interesting thing about the Jack-o'-lantern will-o'-the-wisp thing is they, in later years, closer to our timeline, they really connected a lot with a character named Stingy Jack, who was a character who was a thief and or a smith who tricked the devil a whole lot of times. In one version, he tricked the devil into turning into a magic silver coin, which he ended up putting in his own wallet, which had a cross in it, trapping the devil in his wallet. In another version, he trapped the devil up in a tree, put crosses on the tree so the devil couldn't climb down. In both folktales, Jack lets Satan go only after he agrees to never take his soul. Many years later, the thief died, as all living things do. Of course, Jack's life had been too sinful for him to go to heaven. However, Satan had promised not to take his soul, and so he was barred from hell as well. Jack now had nowhere to go. He asked how he would see where to go, and as he had no light, and Satan mockingly tossed him an ember from the flames of Hades that would never burn out. Jack carved out one of the turnips, which were his favorite food, put the ember inside, and began endlessly wandering the earth for a resting place. And tricking people into wandering into bogs, because he's a trick. Or is he? In other versions of this story, the ember itself is his soul, and he has to keep it burning forever in order for his soul not to burn out while on this mortal world. Which kind of ties into the whole community bringing the hearth fire and keeping that hearth fire burning, but an evil version of it. Or is it an evil version? There are tales of Jack-o'-lantern actually getting chased down, people seeing him and him being a miserable, tortured soul. He's also a pretty evil person, tricking the devil and tricking people. He'd trick anyone, rob them, beat them, screw them over, or just generally be petty in pretty much all of these stories. However, there are other stories in which he's a fairy king, Jack-o'-the-lantern. Husband of Joan the Wad, Queen of the Piskies. So that's pretty interesting that there's this evil, horrible version of Stingy Jack, Jack-o'-the-lantern, and yet there's also this Cornish one, where he's actually the happy-go-lucky husband of Joan the Wad. So it's really interesting. I love when there are conflicting versions of tales like this. Is he an evil figure, or is he a figure of good who's simply been maligned? Kind of like a really old Well, like all the best parts of history. I love when there are conflicting stories because it creates a mystery. Is this Jack-o'-the-lantern some new figure? Or is he one of the ancient fairies or gods from back in the days before the Christians spread into Europe? Is he one of the gods they're praying to in this hearthfire? Jack-o'-the-lantern, fairy king? Possible precursor to Jack Skellington. What is his true nature? What is the nature of the spirits being communed with on Samhain? Because they had a different version. When you look at the pictures of the old, ancient Irish fairy parades coming through on Halloween, it actually looks a lot more like one of those cool monster parties you'd see Frankenstein and Wolfman at. And it's all very interesting. It's probably what I'm going to be digging into very soon. I think this is where my imagination's taking me, into bizarre, ancient Irish and North fairy history. But the most important question regarding all of this is, of course, how does it tie in to Game of Thrones? And the way we do that is through the really obvious connection between jack-o'-lanterns and weirwoods that I only thought of this Halloween while carving pumpkins and thinking about Game of Thrones theories. So, in Game of Thrones, the weirwood trees are, they're pretty big status symbols amongst the lords. Everyone likes having a really big, fancy weirwood tree in their castle. And they're also the way people worship and commune with the gods, the old gods. And unbeknownst to most, it's actually a way for the children of the forest to spy on them. Children of the Forest and the Green Seers. And as I was there carving that pumpkin, thinking about this, I couldn't help but wonder, what if there was someone looking back through our pumpkins? Someone like Brynna the Blood Raven? Could it be that the jack-o'-lantern tradition comes from a similar deal? That everyone had to carve jack-o'-lanterns at Samhain so that the fairies would know where everyone was when they went about their fairy business, and that we just forgot about it over the years? Probably not. But the awesome answer is yes, and so that's the one we're going with. What if there are people looking back at us through our jack-o'-lanterns? Just like Bloodraven and the Children of the Forest looking through those weirwood trees. Something interesting to think about. I love theorizing about how all these solutions should work. Is there anyone still looking? Or have even the old gods forgotten about this technique? And whether or not the old gods are still looking through, it brings up a question. What if the person looking through was you? What if we were to use the principles of chaos magic, which I'm going to assume you're already an expert in? What if we were to use the principles of chaos magic, mix it with some Halloween magic and some Game of Thrones fiction magic, and use this pumpkin network that emerges every year all over the world as our spy network? What would we see we were to look through these pumpkins? What would be the ultimate technique for doing it? Would we simply hold a lit jack-o'-lantern in our laps and stare into the fire? Stare into those eyes, those smiles, those flames, see where our vision took us? Communing with the spirit of whatever's down there to look out through all those eyes all over the world. So there's some pumpkins in interesting places. How many billionaires have pumpkins outside their mansions? How many congressmen have kids bringing pumpkins to them every year? Bright and smiley jack-o'-lanterns with flames lit inside them. Are there pumpkins at the White House? What if we were the ones looking back through the pumpkins, spying all over the world? Would we see the people we want to see? Or would we find something darker when we look down there? Either way, I think this is going to be a pretty fun magical technique. Video game Vision Quest. Ukoma Pefigu Nosa Lehitu Roba. I'm out of here.